silent fortress slingshot. Gravity hadn't changed, but standing required a decision now, a conscious effort that hadn't been necessary 3 seconds ago. General Scon braced his massive right claw against the primary command console. The main viewport showed the isolated human moon base. It was completely silent. No return fire, no energy shields. Just an open, unencrypted comms channel broadcasting the rhythmic, wet crunching of what his tactical officers had identified as a toasted biological starch. Operations Officer Chen was eating. The target lock klaxon blared. The part of this siege that still forces my shell plates to lock at night? That comes later. That same wet, crunching sound. Skarn had first heard it over a local intercept 4 days ago, right after the Rythek Trench Dominion initiated the orbital blockade. He had stood on this very command deck, his barnacle-encrusted carapace gleaming under the harsh tactical lights. A glorious day for his career. This outpost was supposed to be a standard subjugation. Skarn had commanded 32 sieges. He had never failed. He expected orbital defense arrays. He expected desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, his forward scouts had returned from the outer perimeter with nothing but a single recovered item, a human journal. It smelled strongly of engine grease. The final entry ended abruptly, right in the middle of a word. Clearly, the owner had fled in sheer terror at the sight of the mighty Rythek Armada. That was the only logical conclusion. Wonderful. Excellent. Another glorious conquest for the Dominion. Skarn had immediately ordered a continuous plasma bombardment of the southern sector, a standard display of overwhelming force to break their spirit. The humans did not return fire. They didn't even raise a kinetic barrier. It was insulting. Skarn had requested this deployment specifically to secure a promotion to the High Admiralty. If this report reached the fleet commanders before his transfer paperwork cleared, he would be reassigned to a border patrol. He had a clutch of larvae to feed. He needed a combat victory. The bombardment rained down on the gray lunar dust for 12 consecutive hours, melting the outer communications towers into slag, which should have prompted an immediate, unconditional surrender, but instead resulted in 3 humans in hazard suits walking out of the main airlock carrying welding torches and a large insulated liquid container. They ignored the fire. They were doing maintenance. So they are out there with welding torches, and I am watching this on the main screen, and nobody in the command center is moving a single claw. I was about to order a targeted strike on their primary life support systems when the chief engineering officer, a younger Rythek whose dorsal plates were still soft, approached the command dais. He reported a gravitational anomaly. The moon base wasn't returning fire because it didn't possess conventional artillery. It was a mining facility. But the deep core scanners showed a massive, unprecedented spike in localized gravity. Well, manipulation. Skarn laughed, a sharp clicking sound from his mandibles. How delightful. Let the primitive mammals try a localized gravity well trick. He picked up his data pad to log the enemy's futile, pathetic resistance. Then he realized his inner shell plates had locked completely shut. A biological panic response. The datapad had a small scratch near the top left corner. Skarn stared at it. It was just a scratch. Maintenance really needed to replace these issued devices. The engineering officer continued speaking. The data on the tactical screen began to shift, the trajectory lines pulling into a sharp, terrifying curve. "They are not targeting our ships, Siege Master," the officer said. Skarn looked up from the scratch on his pad. "Of course they aren't. They have no weapons. They are using the moon's gravity, sir. They are creating a slingshot corridor." A slingshot corridor. Skarn repeated the words. His primary claws scraped the reinforced deck plating. The engineering officer brought up the orbital mechanics grid. It was an absolute disaster. The humans were not generating a weapon. They were using the moon itself. By manipulating the localized gravity well of their own facility, they had captured a passing C-class asteroid. They were accelerating it through a continuously collapsing and expanding gravitational tether. The mathematical elegance of the maneuver was revolting. They were simply letting orbital physics build infinite kinetic energy, while we wasted our most expensive plasma reserves on their reinforced roof. I noticed the engineering officer's tunic was slightly misaligned at the collar, a completely irrelevant detail. My tactical display flashed with a predicted impact trajectory that required 3 separate processing cores to verify the proximity alarm shrieked. Not the standard warning, the catastrophic collision alert, which brought us to the target lock klaxon, the crushing weight in the room, and the unencrypted broadcast of Officer Chen chewing his toasted starch. The secondary gravity spike hit the command deck. Standing required a decision. Skarn made the decision. He leaned his immense weight into the console, his ambulatory joints protesting loudly. The asteroid was no longer passing by. It was curving, a massive, jagged mass of iron and silicate, whipping around the moon's dark side. The telemetry data scrolled too fast to read. The humans had calculated the exact moment our plasma bombardment would weaken their outer crust, just enough to let the localized gravity well snap the rock into a new vector. 0.2% of light speed aims directly at the center of the trench Dominion Armada. The comms channel crackled. The crunching paused. A new voice spoke. "We brought snacks. This won't take long." How perfectly splendid. They were watching a show. 80% of my military education dictated a coordinated counter-barrage. 20% demanded a tactical repositioning. I ignored both. My respiratory gills flared, drawing in nothing but stale, panicked air. It was a maneuver so universally recognized as suicidal that it violated 14 separate fleet safety doctrines, which meant I was simultaneously transmitting the evacuation codes while actively drafting my own formal court-martial defense in my head because I was profoundly enraged by their casual arrogance and completely consumed by the sheer reality of the kinetic death hurtling toward my flagship. The fleet shattered its formation. We ran. We ran from a mining facility that hadn't fired a single shot. The asteroid clipped our Vanguard cruiser. It sheared through the heavy port nacelle without slowing down, without breaking apart, simply deleting 3,000 tons of military-grade armor from the local space-time continuum in absolute silence. The humans hadn't even bothered to aim carefully. They had simply thrown a rock with the force of a dying star, trusting that we would be too large and too slow to move, and they were eating. I filed the official threat, reclassification, from the medical bay. I looked at the recovered human journal resting on the examination table. The grease-stained final entry ended mid-sentence. They hadn't fled in terror. They had just stopped writing because the bombardment was boring them,